me come from the village city area. 110% Belize and proud of it, sir. No, tell me about maritime area. Long time ago, agreement by the slave master. Talking about the head on the Belize and dollar because patriots. All people who love them country bad, love them homeland. Will never give it up to another nation. Them country bad, love them homeland. Will never give it up to another nation. This a the we we the fear. Nobody do it to no Guatemala. Follow me now. This a the we we the fear. Nobody do it to no Guatemala. This a me name is Pupa. Belize me come from the village city area. 110% Belize and proud of it, sir. No, tell me about maritime area. Long time ago, agreement by the slave master. Talking about the head on the Belize and dollar because patriots. All people who love them country bad, love them homeland. Will never give it up to another nation. Them country bad, love them homeland. Will never give it up to another nation. This a we the fear. Nobody do it to no Guatemala. Follow me now. This a we the fear. Nobody do it to no Guatemala. This a me.
I don't know where we're here. Like greetings and good morning, and welcome to Sunday Review for this morning, Sunday, November 24th. I am Sister YaYa Marin Coleman, the producer and host of the only news review talk show in the country. Well, bragging about that, the only one. I know entire thing serious, you know, because Zingfensten for starting, even if we can't keep it up on any other media hosts and people follow. Not a single body follow with news review. Not a single one. And then we do it Sunday morning because look past Saturday and Sunday, other than social media hosts go to sleep. They only work Monday through Friday for the most part. And so this morning we're simulcasting on Creme Radio and we're also on YouTube XTV Belize and Facebook XTV Belize. So this morning we have two guests, and they're not the first time the guests can join me, and I could expect them more in the future. The guests are from the Institute for Social and Cultural Research, ISCR, under the National Institute of Culture and History, NICH umbrella. So they are, I can introduce my brother first, because I don't like them top-down business, so we're going bottom up here, Brother Giovanni. Brother Giovanni Pinelo is a senior education officer at the Institute for Social and Cultural Research, ISCR. Good morning, Brother Giovanni Pinelo.
Hi, good morning, Sister YaYa, and everyone listening to us this morning. Pleasure to be here.
I see you got on your Nation Proud and Free t-shirt. Anyways, you're proud and free of this nation. I don't know who tell people we free. I don't know who. That's why I'm just like, what? Anyways, we're gonna get to it. This is our decolonizing conversation. We have to get to it. We also have our brother Ronaldo Cocom, who is the director of the Institute for Social and Cultural Research. And so now you have to remind me, I just over here, I got a job, you know. Kind of act like the money in the job long time, kind of bring pressure. Morning, brother Rolando.
Morning, Sister YaYa, and morning to all the lovely Belizeans listening to us at home and abroad.
It's good to have you both, and I could really tell Belizean people. I'm the chairperson of United Black Association for Development Educational Foundation, UEF, one of the 4 pillars of Zingfence, and our focus is the liberation of African people, doing consciousness-raising actions. And for that to really have the kind of impact it should have, and our focus as African descendants, racialized as Black people, would really be good for all Belizeans if we had a healthy relationship with the states, because the states have the responsibility in narrating, documenting how we came to be as a people in this country, and open to changes. And so that's why, under former director, we could have this conversation. And so I really appreciate that Ono too, that it the position one or the now. And I think that one big part of my willingness to work with Ono and respect the work Ono do, that because two Ono have one level of awareness as human beings. And we're having this conversation during the break. We are focused today on we're looking at archival documents, and I just want to say before I get in the mic that there's some things we need to be very aware of when we're looking at archival documents. And that could be wills, personal letters, official documents from churches, diaries. It could be a whole bunch of things. But I want to keep in mind as we go through them two things. One, these are in the languages of the colonizers. So it could be English, French, Dutch, language of the colonizers. Two, people have biases because they're human beings. So I tell you what my bias. So me looking through the archives, I didn't look for my African people. Brother Rolando looking through the archives might be looking for other things. Brother Giovanni looking through the archives might be looking for other things. You have to look upon a time period of what was happening globally at that time, because the British the thing other than that, I believe. So find out like the impact. Maybe you look upon the independence of what they call the Central American region, what I have for the word Belize. You look upon other things. And also, remember, these are documents that were chosen, the intentional what they were put in the archive. So you have archival erasure of, let's say, indigenous people, African people, women's stories, for example. So we just have to read it carefully and be critical. So not I say all that. I want to get for under 2 cents on how important una think the awareness of the person who is doing the research, like if it's original research, or who is interpreting archival documents. Una see one relation between the awareness of the person, the acceptance of the person as the being that they are in relation to the kind of work?
Yeah, if I could, but maybe just before that, Sister Yaya, if you allow me just to say, because we're dealing with our African descendants in Belize, and to recognize, that there's still some suffering in some regards right now with regards to the flooding in the river valley. And so I just want to kind of like highlight that we bear in mind that not everybody has the ease of moving around and living in a location that isn't flood prone. And I think that was an important thing to think about, because more and more climate change will impact us. And I think that's another big thing that we have to be thinking about. And I just want to express some solidarity there on that point, because as you said, that's the constituency that we're talking about. And so I just give thanks that ultimately everybody, we have no lives lost, but I know people are experiencing hardships because of the storm, and hardships in many other ways. And certainly African people in Belize have experienced tremendous hardship, having been forced to labor and generationally all of those wealth extracted from families and from Belize. So I just wanted to start with that acknowledgement. And then you're absolutely right. Like, how do we do this type of work without a level of awareness in terms of the history, in terms of our personal position of where we are in society, sometimes privileged, sometimes less privileged than others, and to be critical and to also be, I think, empathetic to the experiences of others, meaning we want to understand where you come from, where I am, and how we could create a more equal and better society. And so you're absolutely right. And that same type of principle of awareness also applies to the document, as you indicated. What did the person who recorded the document have as his or her bias, and how do we analyze that? Where was the person trained? Where was the person working? What conditions would have led them to have this position or to record history in this way? And so history, as you always say, it's a process of analysis. It's a process of analyzing why people have the viewpoints and why things were the way they were, or why things are the way they are today. And that all of this is a combination of different actions that humans have done, sometimes savagely to one another, and sometimes with a glimpse of hope in terms of opening up more freedom for Belize, or for ourselves, and so I just wanted to give that acknowledgement. Sorry if I throw you off, but
No, not at all. As you remind me before the show start, that Sunday review, we review news stories from the past week. And yes, US solidarities with African descendants racialized as Black people. Belizeans have suffered systemically from these flooding. And so I cringe when I hear the Prime Minister make one off the cuff remark about, I think, people in the Albion Islands, like, they know say yeah, flood all the time to at the rephrase. Like, you know, yeah, flood all the time, should I consider moving? Like, how, as the political leader of this country, how insensitive. Like, somebody, I never said it, but somebody tell me the sister will own the large Jack Crooked tree. How, I think that 8 times the sister said, like, there are not people who got bag of money. Like, we continue to live we life, but we not think about the impact on people's lives for weeks, months, years. What we do, and yeah, thanks for that reminder, Rolando, of the Belizean people who are hurting, and oftentimes they don't get no bag of money, they don't get no building supplies, they don't get no startup again. They not get no you don't have to pay the taxes like they smart and developers, big industries where they come in. So respect to that for bring it full circle, Rolando. Brother Pinelo, I can hear you answer the question.
Good morning once again. Yeah, indeed. I'm very quite aware of what you are noting in and the rigors of academics in terms of looking at documents that are made available to us. But I think that every one of us, and let me speak for myself, I grew up with my maternal grandmother. And I guess you know what that means in terms of conversations in the home, something that we are lacking now. The stories that I heard from my grandmother are what also help to influence me when I'm looking through documents. And of course, we hope that people who have written into the documents and have reinterpreted it are able to make critical associations, but maybe even personal associations. And that for one is a key element. And again, as they say, no, the absence of evidence is not evidence of absence when we speak about our ancestors in this area. So the stories that I now read through, for example, I can align them with, I can see the parallels of what my grandmother and other elders in our community have shared with me over the decades. So indeed, and if I may piggyback too on this issue of the floods, for me it's also a reminder of what our ancestors went through, while the elite looked forward to such type of floods, which would bring down uh, all that high quantity of square feet of mahogany and cedar, etc., etc. Imagine how many of our ancestors who were forcefully engaged in that laborious industry, what hazards they faced. Today we kind of see, we can see uh, kind of like the cycles reoccurring, and while our people are not engaged in the same, it's still the descendants of those very same peoples, as Rolando has highlighted in the intro, um, that is a critical component. So yeah, connections within what we do, um, besides looking at records, that is only a small portion. I think the more critical component is when we converse, as you are doing through your program, reaching out, making sure that there is a degree of conversation that continues through the airwaves, in this instance. So yeah, indeed, we have quite a lot to do if we are going to, as Dr. Io says, no, if we're going to free our minds, there's quite a lot that we need to do, and the earlier we do it, the better it is.
Excellent. You brought a point in that is oftentimes overlooked. The oral storytelling, which is just as relevant as the documented storytelling. And when you make the point, you don't have one lot of going about what the telling story. Times have changed. So that's another thing we talk about. How do we get, especially younger people, to engage in caring about the past, our stories? And I'm going to say today earlier that one of the reasons why I know attend the UB lectures, I find it for be dry and very colonial in its presentation when there are other ways to engage people. You don't always get the majority of the people, but you're the bill and base. So just like how I have 60-second sermon, you know what else come on? Not that I don't support no organized religion. It's up to us to think creatively, and we are not spring chicken of how to engage people. So I'm going to tell them for the Know Your Caribbean podcast, where you have this sister from St. Lucia, Black woman. Her name is Fiona Compton. She's a Caribbean historian and an artist. And she decolonized the archives and throw in a local language, cause bad words sometimes. If I'm not mistaken, it is the #1 podcast in the Caribbean. #1. And they have a lot of podcasts in the Caribbean. And so that we find ways to engage people and how we may choose to engage. And I think that we're different with Uno. Uno to work 9 to 5. Uno have one mandate. Uno can't just do what Uno want. Whereas like Arundhati Roy said, real resistance have real consequence with no paycheck. So I could poke at Uno, but Uno now have the kind of freedom where I have. But anyways, Uno put in some work today. So tell me, Uno have one bunch of slides. So tell me, what I tell them is I want we go through the conventions with a look on the origin of beliefs. There's new research being done. And I don't know how much of this actually in the classrooms from primary school to tertiary level, or if they still repeat the same stories over and over again, the singular European narrative. So we want to look past some conventions because that the law got to a lot of times, and not because the law mean it just, because enslavement was not just, apartheid was not just, Jim Crow was not just, but they were all legal. And then we have some origin stories centering African people, because we interest as African descendants racialized as Black people. But so how Uno, because I know they give no space to talk about what Uno doing now on the work Uno get paid for. How Uno decide, like what the for the mandate? What the ISCR mandate?
Right. And so ISCR established through law, and it's one of the divisions of NICH, and as part of the mandate, it includes approving research that is done in Belize so that we can create a catalog of this research in social sciences and history. And so that's one of the things that we do. One of the other things that we do is we want to create an inventory, a big list of all the different cultural practices that communities see are important to them, and then to be able to find ways of transmitting those traditions that are most at risk and which communities says are very much important to them. So there's a need for them to want to pass it on. And just to give an example with interest to African descendants is, for instance, the Bram. And so the Bram, very much known in the records as well, not labeled as Bram, but labeled as, for instance, people parading in Christmas time when the logging season is out in Belize Town. And people, as some of the records would say, in speaking their different dialects and waving their flags, which to me is essentially a carnival. Carnival has its West African origins that is perhaps different than what we currently think about carnival in Belize. But those are the roots, those are the root lines, as has been promoted as a framework to understand Belize. And then to say that I think we want to do this in a way that is community based, and so it's always as you hinted at, like how do you prioritize things, and some of them are based on interactions and feedback that we get from people and things that come up as urgent. And so with regards to BRAM, one of the things that we do work with the National Creole Council um, is currently to nominate BRAM to UNESCO representative list. And this is the same representative list on which the Garifuna language, music, and dance is on as an element, as an aspect that is important for humanity. And so that allows for certain measures and certain investments to happen by communities through the United Nations system. And so those are the three lines of work that we do. And the way that we are hoping to frame this in terms of what is ISCR, we want to begin saying that ISCR work then is about decolonizing history and culture. And this means that we need to adopt an approach that is much more sensitive to community leaders and community voices in all aspects that we do. And I think, Sister YaYa, you have really been sort of like guiding me, implicitly, I think, in terms of how do you actually do decolonial work and how do you do reparations work. And so I think this is what we're doing essentially, and when we do collaborate with other partners and I see opportunities within the system. I know that as I like that quotation about resistance, but I also think that resistance today is much more multifaceted. So resistance could be with the machete, a physical armed confrontation that we've seen in history. But I think resistance today also means resistance at the different positions where we are in terms of doing good work, doing good change for the benefit of, in our case, Belizeans. And I think that it's a long-term struggle that we're engaged in. And then when we invite, new partners, because I really think that there are a lot of Belizeans out there who are doing good work as well, and I don't personally know. And so I certainly, again, extend solidarity to those measures that people are taking at a cost. As you rightly said, Sister YaYa, this is at a cost. Personal sacrifices, economic sacrifices. There's a lot that goes on in the different struggles throughout Belize, from culture to history to environment and to politics. So there's a lot of issues that I think Belizeans face. But our focus at ISCR is to contribute in terms of decolonizing history and culture with active participation of communities.
I just have to shake my head and say, here we go again. I really have one issue with a small group of people to make decision for a wider group. There's no way in hell I may have to make no Bram. There's no way. If I had, first thing I may have said the Creole language. So I don't know, like.
We also have a program for the Creole language that's happening with other partners as well.
But what I say is, then thing happening in a silence, the community, this is what get me. How people were said and represent people. Fortunately for we have one media house. Fortunately. But this continuously small group of people, like the NGC have a memorandum of understanding with the government of Belize from the 90s. I don't know, no other cultural group will have memorandum of understanding with our administration to say, we've attacked for the people. I don't know if a majority of Garifuna people, they actually NGC not talk for them, but on paper I say the work. So they're decolonizing. National Creole Council never even organize when they have the people. So National Creole Council, they talk evidence-based, have no credibility. But you said that because UEF conscious and UEF hold the state accountable, the state can complain at UEF face, but the state need one black face for their agenda. So NKC just show up. That's dishonorable to African ancestresses and ancestors. And we have to have the hard but difficult conversation publicly and to say how we can change it. Now, again, I never say I do this level of work with the state. So it matter who that the individual. I understand that there's some level of state work what we have to do. But we have to be transparent. We have to be honest. We have to have the conversations publicly. So now one time we said something like, oh, here, and then what does that do for the people? Like I had a Garifuna sister a couple weeks ago, which I never thought about, but I'm like, hell, This make all the sense. While UNESCO, blah, 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 she's like, well, yeah. No way in that UNESCO, blah, blah, blah. You hear about spirituality. The big importance of talking Garifuna language, that will be able to communicate with the ancestors and then do that in a Garifuna. But you know, say no connection in, and so that the way I say you have to be careful of who you to work with and what them people to push. So what I find happen that believes on that is culture is performance culture. All of that just performance. Like, what is it? It reach the people, what it do for the people life. So I really think you know, have to look at a way to have their conversation so you really have genuine community participation. It really matter. I know we oh my gosh, that
If,
after 11 already.
if I if I may
Go
if I
ahead,
may
Brother Pinelo.
yes, if I may, and it's not to counter what you say, but rather to reinforce what you're saying. And one of the things that at ISCR we also have the opportunity of doing is to engage with individuals in their own small pockets of communities, perhaps not even aligned with any wider organization, but individuals who are carrying out uh, cultural practices of their own. For example, 2 weeks ago, and while yeah, all of these colonial structures are in place and dates and so on, and even religion, but there are people who have retained this sense of personal identity, of connection with the past, with a view towards the future. And so a key example is for finados or Hanal Pishan, as our mestizo brothers and sisters from Western and Northern Belize in particular, and we know that there are other areas in the country continue to do. So we get the opportunity, the invitations come to us, please come. We need to document this. We need to showcase how we connect with our people, with our past and into the future by, for example, like I said, finados, Hanal Pishan, honoring the ancestors. Or, for example, going further south, and as we see, and even the deer dance, which has come up kind of a controversy lately with Miss Universe, etc., etc. But the key thing is there are people who are rooted in their history, in their culture. And that is also part of the work that we do. Upon the invitation of people who are very conscious of who they are and the need that they have to keep that connection with the wider cosmovision, we are able to network. So again, navigating those issues within the framework that we have is critical. And I think the more our people are conscious of who they are, of what me, the personal I, means, and the importance of that group working together for a common goal, I think is something that needs to be looked at more closely too. Yeah.
I rate the response. I rate indeed this one organization talk for everybody, this one leader talk for everybody. I rate that people are, because they're on way of life. Like people that live this life every single day. Like Obed are very much African spirituality and way of life for a lot of Belizean people. Whether they talk about it or not, they're on way of life. So yeah, again, go back to oral stories, Brother Pinelo, but with a past break time. It's 11:05. First break. ISCR and NICH. Now, I've asked you, when the government declared a public and bank holiday in 2021, a bunch of archival documents appeared on this website. Now, I don't know why then, again, our community effort was starting at 2014 for the recognition of African Emancipation Jubilee Day. In 1888, our African ancestors and ancestors, Simon Lamb, started that process. But if me left to the government of Belize, I never know. I could get that clear. And so when community owns something, the hell for government take on back, because that's what happened right now. UEF own that. Government could, with all their resources, people with eyes can see that just, they've done meaningful work because then they bring out this website will need to be updated. But I'd ask you to know for the information we want to share now. What make you decide for, is it because you have one particular interest in African descendants and I ask you for be guests that wanna do it or wanna already had it on just to bring it forward?
I think that one mixture of both in some ways, because like we carry out personal research or we are familiar with things when over time. I mean, Mr. Pinelo, who works with me at ISCR, has been involved in this for much longer than I have, and certainly through training and through work, I have access and know been able to read some of these archival records that many African descendants in Belize don't have access to or have read. And so I think now part of the responsibility of, because of UEF actions to emphasize decolonizing the archives and decolonizing history, we have a much higher responsibility to make sure that we're providing these records to Belizeans in a way that's more open access. And I think so that's certainly it's a two-way response to say yes. And we recognize though that like the archives has been transforming in many fronts, right? Like, well, first we know that a lot of these archival records we don't have access to them, physical access to them, due to the fact, in the first case, the early settlers in Belize were not interested in record keeping, by and large, and then two, the records that were being stored somewhere often got destroyed by flood, fire, hurricanes, and so on, or being stolen by individuals. So all of that it's part of, formally, academically, they call it erasure. So then erasure history, because even though these documents that we currently have, we have to read against what is on the paper, to read in between the lines of what is said. We recognize that we don't currently house a large collection, as do the colonial inheritors. No? So the Kew archives in London is where a majority of these records still reside. And we have to read against what is written. And I think part of what you're doing in creating these series for us and inviting us as partners to give insights and perspectives and develop an understanding. Because one of the things that people don't realize is that history is not just what is in a book. It is a collaboration of different persons and ideas coming together and agreeing upon what is important in the interpretation. So I think it's important to acknowledge those physical limitations and just to invite the collaboration of UAF and other partners who are interested to do this type of work.
Big thanks, Brother Pinelo, that you want to start the rest of the show.
Just before you go,
Alexa
if I may,
Bilal is the MCO, and just tell her what slide or picture you want to see to enhance what you want to see. I ready for the storytelling.
I'm comfy with whichever one. And I just want to add that for me, besides reading besides the oral stories in my community, and I grew up in Benqueviejo as well as in Corozal, in Libertad. I was in San Esteban for a while as a child, of course, before coming back home to Benque. And so the stories with our neighbors, the stories, and in fact, I'm seated downstairs of my little house in the yard that belonged to my great grandmother, as we speak. But all those stories, have kept on. And when I entered the teaching profession in the mid-80s, I had to take exams, and one of those included history. Belizean and Caribbean history. So my interest there just increased. Additionally, in the 90s, in the late 90s, you will recall that, yes, the Amandala and all the editorials and from the publisher and many other featured stories always highlighted the need to know ourselves. So those are some of the motivators. And in the late 1990s, as I was saying, the Africa Maya History Project began in the primary school system, of which I was a part of. And I'm proud to say that the coordinators of the program and trying to get it out to the entire nation was another motivator for me to continue into in this line of work. And so every opportunity I've had to interview elders, for example, and to interview young people too, especially those who are family members who share their stories, creates this sense of consciousness that it's not just a group. The colonial idea, the colonial sentiment was to have us look at our differences and not our common threads. And so that in and of itself is as you say, as we can say, in Spanish we say no hay mal que por bien no venga. Out of bad, something good arises. Yes, you try to separate us, you try to suppress our people's knowledge, but that was not it was not triumphant. The triumph came because our people knew how to retain and to transmit the oral histories. And so now when we see these at the archives, now that we have the opportunity, and we go beyond even what we have in Belize or even what the British may have in their archives. And we've had the opportunity to also be the archives of Central America. And I can tell you that it has a wealth of information about Belize. And so something I hope can be done that we can establish a strengthened collaboration between our nations, between our archives across the region, because if we're going to tell our stories, it's not in isolation.
Valid point. When I was in university, they had interlibrary loan when you have to do. They have the technology that just to make it happen. But what I have then is she done start to show some of the pictures already. So
Right.
Alexi, make we start from the top when they have African presence in 18th century Belize, and you have the Ascentia or contract, and then you have that green background where you have the date of 1501 African presence in the America. Yeah, there you go, brother Pinelo, do your thing.
Okay, one of the things, and of course these are based on information that is available. But when we go beyond it, the question has always been, or one of the key questions is when were Africans first present in Belize? And we're going to look at this more in the 18th century proper, because we know that Africans' presence in the entire region of the New World is much, much older. I think we had a conversation on that sometime in September. But looking at this era now, more of the documentation, a lot of times we think that it may have only begun with the arrival of the British and the issuing of a license for the importation of Africans to the New World. In reality, we know that from early on, by 2-3 years within the arrival of Columbus, again the colonial story, beyond that, already Africans were among the first peoples who came. But whose names are listed? It's not our Africans ancestors who are listed in it. But by understanding even deeper a little bit about Belize and the truer, a more recent African presence, we know that this document, something which European nations had fought for, a license, quote unquote, an authorization to bring in Africans and enslavement in the New World. By 1713, the British were monopolizing the trade. And so putting one and one together, the British in Belize and Africans being brought in, it begs the question, who under what conditions? And why is it that, as you mentioned earlier, the erasure of the names of these individuals occurred? Of course, who tells the story will always give their side of the story. So reading against it, we realize that it's not far-fetched. What we have been told is 1720, Africans were in Belize under this new colonial order of the exploitation of people and resources. But we know that they were in the Campeche region. Even the same Britishers, the same explorers who were writing are telling us that Africans were involved in the industry which the Europeans aimed for. So by the early 1700s, it is not a far-fetched idea. It's not outside of the of reading against the grain of the documents that we can clearly state that the African presence in Belize dates to earlier than 1713 in this region. I'm convinced of that now. All the fanfare in terms of, and I find it, you know, making a connection today. We hear a lot of our cyclists go to Ciudad del Carmen in Mexico, in Campeche, just off the coast of the Veracruz region. And we hear way back of the exploits and of the conflict between the English and the Spanish, the pirates and so on. And where were they seeking refuge? And if you go to the next slide, the next slide, if you please, we see that they arrive in what, 400 years ago, 350 years ago. The African presence in this region clearly is assertive. And so with the conquest of the taking over of Jamaica by the British in 1655, they are continuing to carry on business, whether it was legal or illegal. In fact, it was more illegal because of the economic orders that the Spaniards had set in place. But among the commodities that were traded were African peoples.
That's the image you were asking for, Brother Pinelo.
Yes,
The
yes,
one
that
with
is.
the map.
That is.
And it says, intro into the 18th century, Spanish mercantilism, English monopoly on the slave trade, Jamaica as the center of operations, Belize the entrepot trade, 7, a settlement with enslaved people. By 1723, Spanish decree to dislodge the English and African peoples in the Belize settlement. But what is new for me is you to say, even though you don't have no, and this is what interesting about interpreting history, even though you don't have no evidence, based on when you do have evidence of one 1713 date and other research you've done that there would have been an African presence in Belize before 1713, and I've had a prior conversation about Ivan van Sertima theory of they came before Columbus, that based on the currents from the continent of Africa, you know, people came into this area before the European and the European as colonizers came. So the 1713, you said before 1713, Brother Andofe Iyo had said in the Free Your Mind, a community talk with Andofe Iyo, he has said, A.H. Anderson, 1948, page 29, recorded that the, quote, importation of the first group of Negro laborers happened in 1718. All things being equal, 1718 appears to be the most probable date when captive Africans as well as seasoned Negroes first arrived in the Bay settlement. So I was looking at that 1718 date, but you're saying there's a, and again, this is where you need more research done.
Right.
Okay, so good. We're going on 1713. All right, go ahead with the presentation, because I'll make sure I get through it.
Okay. And so we know, for example, I'm still in search for this 1723 Real Cedula. The Cedula Real is a royal decree. I'm still in search for that one, but we know from other sources that bear in mind that just 25 years earlier, what is now Flores Petén was finally, quote unquote, conquered by the Spaniards. and their establishment of a presidio, of a fort in that island, which is what, barely 200 miles to, yeah, 200, 220 miles away from Belize town, was a center of operations in and across. And so looking at some documents that are from the archives, the General Archives of Central America, Archivo General de Centroamérica, we've been able to, pick out certain inferences based on documents that are available that show that in this area, indeed, there was a degree of interaction. In fact, 1704, between 1704 and 1710, there is evidence of the English and the Sambo Miskit, the Mosquito Indians, carrying out raids up the Belize River all the way towards Petén. It's some information that we just recently came across. Again, so if this is happening, who are the people involved? And it's not that Africans were only, in this case, I do not believe that Africans were only in the capacity of enslavement, but they too may have participated in because of their knowledge of navigating waters, river waters in this case. And we know of the interaction of the English, the Sambo Miskit. So it's complex, but within that complexity, we can make logical inferences. We can make logical deductions that individual peoples whose names may not appear were quite likely part of this wider operation that was occurring within the Belize region. And so if we, I don't know if you want to say something or we go to the next slide.
No, go to the next slide. I listen to your storytelling.
Yeah, so in the next slide, one of the things that we did, and I'm not going to be touching much on the issue of the diplomatic territory, but what we're looking now at is a document. It's a Mosquito Shore Records, which is available at the Belize Archives and Record Services. And it's within that 1770 to 1783 document. And this one, if you can, I don't know if you can zoom. I think I have on the next slide. It's easier because we can see a close-up of it. And when we begin to look at some of the names of individuals.
I think that's the one that we have up now that says recorded by
Yes.
desire of William Cooney, a list of slaves on the shore not yet divided.
That's right.
All right,
So
that's what we have up right now.
So imagine, the names are mixed. And we know for a fact that the people who were enslaved in this case, in the vast majority, were Africans. And I say in the vast majority because there is also evidence that indigenous peoples of the Americas, whether Maya, and other such groups, were also often raided. Their villages were often raided and caught in this vicious cycle of oppressing and suppressing our peoples. But the ones that we've highlighted in green, just by looking at the descriptor and the English given name, or in many instances, African names show up. And these are among the people who were brought into Belize at the turn of the 18th century.
So
and this is just one example.
We'll have, when you look on the left at the MCO for zoom in, under the first set of names, you have Betty, and on that same line, you have Betty plus Igbo, and you have Igbo underlined in a green. When you come down one below that, you have Mongola, Jack. One below that, Igbo, Bofton. And so I'm seeing what looks like indigenous African names that you have underscoring green.
That is right. That is right. So even though there was an attempt in many instances to erase names, there are those that are remaining. And for me, this is important because some of these same names may transfer into places and locations within Belize. I think later on we can see on another slide if we, given the time frame that we have, if we go to the next slide.
That one?
Yeah,
It says the Creole, I don't know if that's what it is, mulatto. It's hard to read these writings sometimes. I don't know if that's the one you want, Brother Pinelo? Or is it the other one that you want that has
okay,
the,
it would be the other one. It would be the
okay, the
other
other
one.
one with the blue box next to it, Alexi,
Yes.
thanks. That one. Big thanks, Alexi. All right. Go
Yes.
ahead, Brother Pinelo. After you finish this
Okay.
presentation, then we go to break.
Right. So this one is from, again, from the Belize Archives and Record Services. It's a baptismal, it's a page from a baptismal records of St. John's Anglican Cathedral, 1794. And again, look at the names that stand out. Graphic transcription, names that stand out, and the descriptors that are given to peoples. And in this case, we see Hagar, and I guess we'll Hagar, a free Black woman. Further down, we see Jane Hewlett, another free Black Jamaican, free Black woman. And all the way down, we see another one, Maria Davis, an African mulatto. So again, these are, you know, as we read through, what is the dynamics? What's the social, cultural, and economic dynamics that is occurring in Belize in the 18th century, directly involving not only slave men, but also enslaved women. And one more, please, because this is another one that stood out, especially when we look at other records from the region. Uh, I,
You could
yeah,
go to the other image, Alexei. And I'm thinking that's the one with the Anglican Church baptisms, 1800.
yes.
Thanks,
And this one
Alexei.
is 1800. May 4th of 1800, we see the baptismal record of two individuals, and it caught our attention. William Stanford and Richard Dobson, both belonging to the Reverend William Stanford. Two
When you say
enslaved persons.
belonging, it's saying that the reverend, as a reverend for the Anglican Church, was an enslaver. And I just said that in our conversation yesterday, is that I just found out in listening to New York Caribbean that the Anglican and the Catholic Church were enslavers. I never knew that before the past 2 weeks. So here you come, bringing it full center home in Belize. Finish your story, brother. Aye, aye, aye.
And this is and what caught our attention to this is that back in about maybe 4 years ago, I came another a well-known historian, Matthew Restal, whose writings about enslavement in the Mexican region and also ties in to enslavement in Belize. And guess what? Among those names that appear is none other than Richard Dobson. Richard Dobson appears in that. And so these connections, and so as we were going through, you know, I was doing some other work at the archives, and if Alexi could go down 2 slides, or okay, there we go, one, and again we see this idea of the seeking for freedom. But this map in particular, is there a way that you can, if go back to the map, is there a
Wait,
way
Brother
that
Pinelo, but make we stick one pin, because we have another like half an hour.
okay, good.
So I don't want to rush it. I want to take your time. All right, maybe take
Okay.
this quick break. Big thanks, Alexi, for all the help, Alexi, with our limitations, because we got limitations at XTV. Big thanks, Alexi. Break time. Yeah, we have
It's
another
an
at least.
massive season with massive deals and rewards at Pennies. From now through December 31st, earn double B-Bucks on store-wide purchasing every
All people who love them country bad, bad love them homeland. Will never give it up to another nation. Them country bad, bad love them homeland. Will never give it up to another nation. This a we we da fi. Nobody give it to no Guatemala. Follow me now. This a we da fi. Nobody give it to no Guatemala. This a me name is Pupa. Belize me come from the Belize City area. 110% Belize and proud of it. No, tell me about maritime area. Long time ago, agreement by the slave master. Talking about the head and the Belize and the
Welcome back to the final segment of Sunday Review. We have Brother Giovanni Pinelo, Senior Research Education Officer. Senior as in age, and they do it for long. You know what they talk about. You don't have to get colonial papers for say, he know what him to talk about. And then you have the director, Ronaldo Cocom. And I really appreciate them going through the archives and identifying information about African descendants specialized as Black people. But go back, leave it, Brother Pinelo, that I asked like us, and I don't want to rush it. I want to take your time with it.
Yeah. So we were saying, having read through and in the interest of making those connections, Matthew Restal, in his work in the archives in Merida, has come across a document, and in fact, he even wrote a story about Richard Dobson, who stole a canoe on the Rio Hondo, and this is in 1800.
Go to the slide before this one, Alexei, where it has crossing to safety frontier fight in the 18th century. Yeah, that the one where we tell about Richard Dobson. It, on the bottom paragraph, it says on another summer night, this one in 1800, a slave similarly slipped out of his master's logging camp in northern Belize. Stealing a canoe on the Rio Hondo, the slave turned maroon, Richard Dobson, paddled downriver to meet up with 3 other Black slaves. Together, they worked their way by canoe into Spanish territory. Having reached Bacalar, they settled therefore for several months as free men. Soon joined by 2 more Black slaves who had also escaped from logging camps in Belize, they found work as laborers, surviving as part of the town's small multiracial community of Spanish officials, Black slaves and freemen, mixed race militiamen, and Maya corn farmers.
Yeah, so this is what Matthew Restal writes based on archival information that he receives. And so when I was looking through the Anglican record, the baptismal record that we find, the name Richard Dobson stood out. And when we look at the date, Dobson gets baptized in May of 1800. With baptism into whichever church, in this case the Anglican Church, there is a degree of trust. There is a degree of freedom, if you like, of movement in and around the area. And again,
Go back to the slide before that one, Alexis, so people can see it. We have the thanks, Alexis, Anglican Church baptism. We don't look to the bottom where they have that rectangle on the right in a black. That the record we have Michael Dobson. Tell them about the slide, Brother Pinelo. You got evidence for you to say?
Yes. So when we look at that slide again, William Stanford, who is the Reverend, clearly the note there that the 2 persons who were baptized, William Stanford and Richard Dobson, still belonged to the Reverend William Stanford. So looking at this,
Brother Pinelo,
yes,
the Reverend William Stanford had an enslaved person when William Stanford too?
This is part of reading against the grain. This is part of reading between the lines. What can we deduce? Could it have been his
children away have a one-away enslaved sister, but he not Reverend? Reverend, anyways, go ahead with the story. Go ahead.
Well, there's certain dogmas, no, within different religious groups. But in this case, what stands out is this, no? The individual has his name. And mind you, don't be surprised, because we have come across other records whereby the enslaver has a child and who has the enslaver's name. So we know that there's a junior, there's a senior. Likewise, oftentimes they might only give them the first name or the middle name. But when you look at it, you can also have to think about the fact that enslavers in dealing with chattel slavery were they continued to impose their surnames on African peoples. So many of our ancestors may have English sounding surnames, English surnames, but was that their original name? You know, so the idea of how people would be named, what names, what identifiers are given to them as such, tells quite a lot about that era that we're looking at. And so if we go down to the next, I would think it would be the next 2 slides. Since we've done the story, you've read the story, that paragraph, and we come to this one with the map. Well, lo and behold, when we look at this map, which is a map of the part of the northern district of Belize, part of the northern district, sorry, let me see what I did here.
It says a map of the northern district of the British settlement at the Bay of Honduras in the province of Yucatan, showing the nature of the country, the situation of the present settlers, and extent of the parts they occupy, drawn by a scale of 1 mile to an inch from actual surveys by David Lamb, 1807-1812.
Okay, and if we can zoom in on the on that same map, on the lower or on the right section of your screen. If you don't mind, Sister YaYa, there's a word that stands out.
Yes, it says Stanford. To the left, it says Stanford. And
Okay.
then something punky.
All right, the pound key today is in northern Belize. That area between Pachacan, Yochen, Chanchen. For those of us who travel to Chetumal and no longer go through Corozal town, at the roundabout just outside of Louisville, you take that roundabout and you drive right through to Santa Elena, the border. No? But the low-lying areas in that zone were known as 10-pound key. Right around 4 Mile Lagoon on the other side of the highway, of the Philip Golson Highway. But this Stanford, other records from the Belize Archives and Record Services show that the Reverend William Stanford indeed had a logging camp on the Rio Hondo. So if we make that connection then, Richard Dobson, who was baptized and belonged to the Reverend William Stanford, is quite likely is the same person who had been enslaved and working at that logging camp owned by the Reverend William Stanford on the Rio Hondo.
Big review. Oh, give thanks. No, I need to come back because we're not touch the we can't
We're
do
not touched
everything at one
Kwashiba yet, who I also happen to have read in another archival record in the UK. You know, so there's a lot of connections now that we're making, that archives again are becoming accessible to us.
One of the things where to me is that growing up, all I hear, big thanks, Alexei. I hear one about African descendants racialized as Black people. You hear about the Belize River Valley, and you hear about Gales Point, Manatee. What was a big reveal for me where this shows is that based on the convention, that between the Rio Hondo and the New River, and based where Paul Lagood grow, rivers, creeks, waterways. So we often think of African enslaved people in a northern Belize, for example. And very much so, because I have Laurie's Bight all the way up north. Then you have Stanford now, again up north. But as African descendants specialized as Belizean people, we not think about up north. And so that, again, that I really appreciate I like maps. For father, I was a surveyor. I like maps. Like maps are one big part of storytelling for me. and then making the connection to what happened now. Well, 11:51, but I'm glad you get the presentation out. Mega ask you know, what did this feel like for you when you made this particular connection, Brother Pinelo?
Like I mentioned earlier, I grew up, part of my childhood, I spent it in the north. I was in Corozal, and I'm aware, I was aware of it. But now being able to piece together some of the oral histories that I had heard as a child and to see it within archival documentation, it's kind of like coming full circle in understanding that the dynamics of the nation that we call Belize is so rich. Unfortunately, the story that has stood out has been the colonial, based on the colonial point of view that had suppressed our a wider picture. And so little by little, as we look at maps, as we look at names, as we look at baptismal records or marriage records, or even quote unquote official reports, and names and circumstances stand out, it's very enriching. It's very enriching, as it is along with Rolando and a few others, and led with by Dr. Io. We have also done some work across the border in the Petén. So what was going on, what we have heard of, uh, we are kind of living it through the archival documents and through understanding that, you know what, as a people, freedom is a critical component. It's a critical element. But that idea, that concept of freedom can only be transmitted from one generation to the other if we know our stories, if we listen to our elders, if we get there, if we get them to tell us who they are, and with all the good, the bad, and the ugly that may be in the stories, it is what shapes us. It is what shapes our identity. So getting this indeed is enriching for me at the personal level.
Big thanks. Rolanda, was there anything you wanted to say that you never get a chance because we would listen to good storytelling?
No, there's many things that I would want to say, but in the interest of time, I'll just say this to kind of summarize what this presentation, that aspect of this presentation has pointed out. What it does is paint a very powerful image of how we are to understand enslavement in Belize. Because here we have one, in the first instance, a reverend enslaving another human being. And that human being being forcibly or accepting to be baptized into the church, and then escaping his enslavement. And again, and that has to do, with it. So we're trying to understand why as well they did this. Why would you be baptized and then run away? And running away was not an easy thing to do, and that's why they often tend to get more persons, because you want here, if you're really freedom, they got to. And so you would bring people with you after, once you found freedom. And freedom, again, is elusive, right? I mean, freedom over there still meant selling your labor, but the conditions must have been better for you to have left the forest and left a camp. And so I think that's what we're dealing with, a very an opportunity to make this break, to say, listen, if slavery was so good and if the church was so good, why were people seeking freedom elsewhere? And it paints a contrary picture, the national picture that we inherited some time ago, which was that Africans in Belize were very content and happy with being an enslaved persons in Belize, and that everything was much better here than anywhere else in the world. And this is a story that the settlers and the enslavers wrote and documented, and these are some of the stories that we inherited. And so I think this is the opportunity now that we're able to make these connections for Belizeans to be aware of a more complex picture. How, in the first instance, less than 200 white men were controlling, enslaving more than 2,000 to 3,000, depending on what here we're looking at enslaved Africans in the society, and how, you know, there were many various ways of people resisting this enslavement, and it was, you know, it's easy to say, well, if I'm just less than 100 or less than 200 enslavers, why they never just physically revolt and, you know, push them out of the settlement, because you were numerically more Africans here. But this has to do with the mind. This has to do with the stories that we tell ourselves and that are being told to us, that listen, this is your rightful place in society. You are less than me. You have to be my property, and you have to work for me, and I will give you food and give you the shelter. And so that's why it's so important, I think, Sister Yaya, the work that you're doing and that CRIM has done, to say that the things that we tell ourselves, the ideas that we have, are perhaps more important than the physical limitations that we place on people, in terms of the physical chains. Their mental chains as well. And I think these mental chains have been unlocked throughout Belize's history by various groups, by various individuals, and they kind of are opportunity for us to pinpoint the way, you know, how we now can think about ideas and the power that they hold over us in current beliefs.
Made some good points, Rolando. Remember now, Christianity that me a serious weapon in the enslavement of African people, and still is. That are one of the serious mental shackles that Christianity. Secondly, remember when we African people came here, they don't like before we were enslaved, we come from the first civilization. So people brought their value system, their spirituality with them. So with all that what and gone through, they still maintain that. And one of the reasons why I'm a band drumming, besides what we African people do at IT, the one of the reasons why, because they said we not write it down. They can't get to that for control that. And that for like that I want out, like that's something why I'm curious about Brother Pinelo is where even if they never write it down from reading archival documents or other records, is how African people held on to their spirituality from the time they kidnapped them across the Atlantic Ocean to the different ports where they dropped them. I want to know how, and Know Your Caribbean, the podcast that I'm telling about, this is to explore that as well. So that's why I say it's so important, as if, like, if Adam and Wada, people will say, well, make I go do. So one of the things will have to happen, we need to bring in Ono and somebody from the archives, so Belizean people could understand how the archives work. So if people want, cannot believe everything what we say, Belizean people could go, elders will retire, Ono could go look through the archives in itself as well, and not make the archives one place where only academians or scholars or no. This is a we story. We have to get involved in the process and stop left it to other people for do the work until we. So, for example, people want to do their family tree. I meet somebody, I think it was yesterday, who was saying, listen, we family never talk about we family history. And so I only have my grandpa name and the airway band. And people want to know, but they don't know how to do that process. So definitely, you know, a future show. Going forward into 2025, we'll have more of these decolonizing the conversation, decolonizing the archives conversation with ISCR NICH and UEF Zinc Fence. I want to know big thanks. We can go to 1 minute each. Final thoughts before we go. And I really appreciate, like, this is a big research. Thanks to Ono. Big thanks, Brother Pinelo. I don't know anybody make for the work. And so I really value the life you've lived to complement the work that you're now doing. Final thoughts, Brother Pinelo, and then Rolando.
Thank you so much. There's so much that we would want to say, but let me just summarize it in a few words. The work has to continue. The conversations must be there. The dialogue must be there. We're talking about our personal identities. We're talking about our family histories. And one way to do it is for you to engage yourself in it. And I'm always reminded of the writing of G. Carter Woodson, in which he speaks about education, speaking the words to the effect that education, there are two types of education, that which is given to you and that which you give yourself. Let's focus on the second type. your UAF, UBAD, CREM, and so many others are engaged in this type of work. Keep on going with it.
Thank you, Brother Pinelo. Rolando?
Yeah, no, I just want to say big thanks to CREM and to UEF for these type of partnerships, and we're looking forward for the next series and big things to come. Sister Yaya, you have big dreams, and we want to be part of that. So thank you so much.
Big respect, big respect. I get one voice note from Brother Will here, but I can't listen to it right now, Will. But Will is say, anyways, we have to have a whole conversation about because that's important. What the people feedback when they hear their conversations. I started on another, again for bring community in for hear how we could have one position, we could say the archives or something, but for the people who are like, yeah, I identify as Creole, I identify as Garifuna, I don't identify as no Africans, I don't know what you actually talk about. People have one right to identify how they choose. And that's absolutely important. I know we have to go to we have to lock off, and I need to thank everybody. But one of the things where you said earlier, Brother Pinelo, which I had mentioned, I get to a new book, in a new book for the first time, and it's this book. For the first time, and I never know that they gave a list of Garifuna people before they got, it says randomly selected non-Hispanized Garifuna names. Now, I don't know if their names are indigenous names or African names, but the first time I missed such one list. And I just to share the connection that you made, that we only talk English and have English last name because our colonizers were English. But other people, colonizers, have their French last names like Martinique and speak the French language. But that for who were we before we were colonized? That really matter for we know who we are today, because we identify based on what somebody else tell we. They said it's their name, they said it's their story, and this their religion, and we get attached to that. I mean, even in the afterlife, we got colonized worldview of what the creator is. So these are needed conversations. Give thanks to the people who had the insight, the courage for create one Black independent media house, the only one I kind in the country, and a Mandela newspaper that did this kind of work for 55 years. Big respect. And that's why I want to stay right just back at the zinc. Anyways, with security guard, Brother Lloyd Lewis, MCO, difficulty, we have to deal with them boss people. Alexi couldn't get bus for come from Sand Hill because Alexi for there zinc for 10 Sunday morning. Can't get boss. Give thanks to whoever given the right for make it get you. For make it come and still start the show in time. Big respect, Alexi Belial. She's a Belizean artist as well. Young Black Belizean sister. And then downstairs in a creme radio, we have Brother Larry Guerrero, known as Larry G, as a radio personality. Big thanks, Larry. This show on repeat at 3:30 today on XTV on your local channel. It was simulcasting on Creme Radio. You could go to XTV Belize on YouTube, XTV Belize Facebook for listen to it at any time. Again, at 5:30. Thanks, Alexi. At 5:30 on local XTV channel. This show will repeat. Big thanks. All mix. I forget for telling about it. A Mandala raffle. On looking at the Mandala newspaper, on could submit as many tickets as you want. Ham turkey, one mix soft drink, mixed creator soft drink. On looking at the Mandala newspaper, on could submit, and then you could drop it off to any one of the Mandala vendors throughout the country or Conda Zinc Fence. I don't have it in front of me right now. But big thanks to ISCR NICH, Brother Giovanni Pinelo. Oh, you know you're gonna find a loan as for your Brother Giovanni. So I have to text her and say your favorite person and listening, Brother Ronaldo Cocom. One of the things what I like about Orlando in a leadership, and that the way, know that's just I make, and I okay being myself. But because of Orlando personality, like Rolando just stay calm, listen. He got fiery now, so don't think I don't push over, push over. But I find him, because of personality and because of my personality, that we could work well together, especially when we disagree. And I'll give Rolando for somebody in leadership. Whereas that people like, I don't want to do YaYa, stay far from YaYa. Which is, but I think that because of personality, because he's comfortably in his skin as a man, that like, when they already come, we ready for you too. So, yeah. But more than anything, I want to thank the staff, because you're the same for them two-faced. But again, the staff, young people, really dynamic young Belizeans. So I really have to give it up to the staff and then treat them good day. So I tell you we appreciate the work on it. We not get a recognition often, and I sure not get a pay. And to the families we have to share, as I send text all hours of the night or day, we're sharing with I really thank all the families. We sometimes we not say we don't know, but we recognize that they don't have family members. People will take care of for making us continue to do this kind of work. So big thanks, ISCR NICH. And remember, only the people want to save the people.
Patriot, to know Guatemala. Follow me now. This is the PA, we the figure. No bad love them homeland. We'll never give it up to another nation. Country bad love them homeland. We'll never give it up to another nation. This is the PA, we the figure. Nobody do it to no Guatemala. Follow me now. This is the PA, we the figure. Nobody do it to no Guatemala. This is me. My name is Papa. Believe me, come from